Lauren, it's good to see you again, and we have some lovely new faces with us.
We sure do. I'll introduce them in just a moment. But if you're joining us for the first time, or if you've been with us on other days, this is the COP Drop. Welcome. We are a daily live stream during COP28, hosted by the Faiths for Biodiversity Coalition and the United Religions Initiative. Each day, we are discussing the latest developments from Dubai with a focus on nature and biodiversity. And we're also learning about the amazing ways that faith and spiritual communities all around the world are working to protect and to restore the environment. As Gopal said, my name is Lauren. I serve as the Climate Action Coordinator for the United Religions Initiative. Gopal is the co-convener for the Faiths for Biodiversity Coalition. And today, we're joined for a special 1-hour conversation with Azmaira Alibhai, Faith and Ecosystems Coordinator for the UNEP Faith for Earth Coalition, and Carrick Reddin, a project manager for the World Resources Institute Faith and Sustainability. You will find previous conversations from COP Drop at the Faith Biodiversity website. And we're looking forward to today going in a little bit deeper, because previous days we've just taken 20 minutes with someone who's on the ground in Dubai, more or less. And today, Dubai is on their day off. Now, we know that's not true. COP is still very busy and things are going on today, but we thought that we would dive in a little more deeply to some ideas today with our friends and guests, Carrick and Azmaira. Let's begin.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. Azmaira, Carrick, good to see you both. Oh, and we've just lost Azmaira just as we're about to get started, but I'm sure she'll join soon. She's currently on location. She's usually based in Nairobi, but in Lisbon right now. But Carrick, what's on your mind? You've been tracking COP. I know you're in London right now, but kind of what's been happening with you, and any thoughts you have, Carrick, about what's happening and you want to bring to the table?
Sure. Thanks, Gopal. Thanks, Lauren, and great to be here with you, Azmaira. I've had a lot of different thoughts going on, perhaps just briefly and from introduction. WRI's Faith and Sustainability Initiative really focuses on conducting research and supporting action with faith actors to achieve sustainable development goals, climate action, and the sort of global goals that many of our organizations are committed to working toward by 2030 and beyond. And WRI has quite a large delegation in Dubai, spanning cities, climate, energy, many experts, folks that bring data and evidence in order to inform the negotiations, the launch of numerous initiatives and declarations. And this year, the first ever Faith Pavilion has been a really exciting and quite inspiring thing to see from our partners. And one of the things that I've begun to think about, I think, is this concept of translation and how we begin to do translation between the voice of the faith leader and that of the politician, or the farmer working on the ground and the delegate at the COP. And I often find that we're speaking about similar things, and we even maybe have similar visions of the kind of world that we want to live in, one in which people, planet, and nature can thrive. But our inability to speak the same language and to do some of this translation can sometimes impede progress. And so I'm curious to hear from you all and to be able to discuss a bit, what do we need to do better in translating between these different scales and sectors in order to foster more effective collaboration?
Who wants to go first? That's a great question. Go on, Lauren. I can see you're waiting for share some wisdom.
Well, in one word, empathy. When I think about farmers and politicians, there's so much stress in either role for very different reasons. And so if we have the opportunity, the privilege of sitting down with a farmer and a politician, I hope that we could just
bring some real empathy to what each of them is trying to do for all of us, whether it's to kind of negotiate and push through a policy or to make sure that we're getting food. So yeah, just as a conversation starter, I'll throw empathy in and see maybe what others want to add.
I'll carry on the one word with diversity. And having a multiplicity of voices, as we've seen in this in the form of the interfaith thematic working groups, is that and we saw this at the Faith Pavilion and several of the platforms that we host, is that we're not looking for a specific type of organization or faith actor to come to the table. It's open, it's inclusive. And what this has shown us is that in the various ways, in the multiplicity of ways that these actors engage with their own communities, engage with the different stakeholders, and then bring it all together in the environmental policy influencing space, demonstrates just how vast the network is and the different threads that we can pull on for the impact that we want.
Yeah, I don't have a one-word answer, but I think what's interesting is society has changed so much in the last couple of decades, definitely in the last 70 years. But in many ways, the way we have these large multilateral conversations has stayed the same, right? In every other way, things have democratized so much. You know, people have access with the internet to talk to each other. A farmer in Kenya can talk to a farmer in India, can talk to a farmer in the United States very easily. You know, a couple of decades ago, that kind of communication just was not possible. So how I think about it is it's a question of translation, but it's also a question of what are the new models or the new systems where all these different players can interact with each other so they all feel heard and seen and their voices can be in the rooms. Because I just think unless that happens, we're going to keep seeing the polarization of decision makers and the people on the ground. And I feel like that's very much, although I'm not there at COP, I know at previous COPs, that's very much pronounced, that the activists feel like their voices aren't being heard in the negotiating room. So like, how do we create new models where dialogue can happen? Then I think the translation happens just by the function of a new way of talking to each other.
I think this is an excellent point, right? And to Azmaira and Lauren's points, a system that can be reflective and inclusive of this diversity and empathy. And I think there's a recognition, right? That there's the work that the UN is doing, there's the work that the World Bank and the IMF are doing to envision what is the future of these kind of institutions. And perhaps much to your question, Gopal, I'd be fascinated to hear from you all. What are those core elements so that the priest from Rwanda, the farmer from Sudan, the school teacher from the States can be participating in these kind of fora that are integrally connected to the future for their lives and the lives of those in their communities, without this need to have such massive capacity building or education to learn how to speak the language of the Bretton Woods institutions, etc. I'd love to hear from you all what you think are the characteristics of this future of these institutions.
Yeah, I don't know about the future of the institutions, but I think one way that we can get to a place where they are more reflective is, I think, and Carrick, you're in London right now, so maybe you're aware of it a bit more than me. But I think in England, they had these citizen assemblies recently, or they were talking about them, or they happened a couple of years ago on climate, I think specifically. And I didn't really track how they were planned and what the effect and the impact was. But I think moving to models like that could be really beneficial. Again, it's a model, I think, that reflects a change in the world, which is like people are more informed than they have ever been, and they want to have a voice. And I think maybe starting at a very local level, whether that's like a town or a state level, and then a national level. But I think that's a way, if we model it at the grassroots, it can percolate up to the global level as well.
What I find is more and more important is as civil society shows up in these global spaces, there is also a need to complement that with national level action. So it's great that you're coming to the UNEAs, the COP28, the COP15, and you're speaking to policymakers who are at the table there. But you're forgetting the very important voice that your own delegation can lend to the work that you're doing. And that only happens when they know you and there's a substantial enough partnership going on there. So what I think would be really important in a transformative way, if you wish, of the way that we engage as a UN entity with civil society is for civil society to partner more with national level organizations, because we've seen that when it comes to turning up in these global spaces, I mean, they're there and they're doing some excellent things and demonstrating that grassroots level work. But when it comes to them saying, look, Ministry of Environment or Ministry of Energy, this is what we want to see in terms of a good, reflective policy on renewable energy. And this is an example that we've been able to provide. Let's see this language in the policy that you're negotiating at COP28. I think there's something to be said there about the real change and about something that can then push the conversation forward in a meaningful way.
This is great. I have a couple of other thoughts that I could throw in, Carrick, but I'm actually thinking they could also work well with something that Azmaira wanted to bring in today. So should we turn there now for some conversation? Azmaira, you had a question or a topic.
Yeah, I mean, I was building our calendar for the next year and I said, oh my goodness, these are not 1, 2, 3, but 5 COPs at least that I think would be interesting for the network to pay attention to. We just lost Gopal, but I'm sure he can hear us. But what we've seen from the Faith Pavilion, and of course this hasn't happened in a vacuum, because although this is the first UNFCCC Faith Pavilion, we did have a physical presence at the Convention on Biological Diversity, led by Faith for Biodiversity and WWF. But we also had a huge online kind of faith presence at UNEP 5.2, and that was the Faith for Dialogue. Now, coming into 2024, UNEA 6, INC 4, the UNCCC, the COP16, the CBD COP16, and COP29. These are all important spaces that I think the network will be engaging on. Plans have already been put in place. But what do we want to see, or how do we want to see faith actors show up in this policy forum? What works? What have we learned from our engagement at COP26, 27, now 28? And what do we want to take into the new year? That's the question I have for you.
So, Carrick, do you want to dive in first?
I think you should go for it, Lauren, and then I'll come in after, please.
Okay. Yes, you're right that there are an incredible number of opportunities waiting for us in 2024. I was thinking more about this question. I was thinking quite a bit about something you said earlier around welcoming the diversity and really, really just warmly inviting many perspectives, many participants. The times are pressing and urgent, and it's really important that we're hearing from everyone. And then the other piece that in my experience of preparing to be at COP15 last year, a long runway. So in the ways that we can be convening now to talk about what we want to be taking place in the Faith Pavilion at the side event, that just I can't stress it enough, and I think the more that we can be collaborating and working together in anticipation of this event, things happen that have nothing to do with the event, right? We meet people along the way. We start comparing research. We start saying, oh, have you thought to ask this survey question instead? And it's then in some ways not really about the COP. It's about all of these relationships that we have built along the way and things that we have learned because of that. Carrick, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's, as I sort of reflect on the question, there's maybe three ways that faith actors show up in these spaces that immediately come to mind. I will necessarily miss other ways, but one I think that's extremely powerful is that many of these groups are working on the ground in local communities with a level of trust that exceeds many other institutions globally, and therefore have an opportunity and even a responsibility to uplift the voices of those local communities, particularly those who are most marginalized or most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, and carry those voices to these international fora. I think there's a prophetic voice that they can have, for example, on loss and damage, which is exciting that it was operationalized, the loss and damage fund, on this first day of COP. There's still a large gap in the amount of resources needed to fund what is projected to be the needs for that fund. I think a second way, and perhaps related to this, is this around advocacy and engagement. And so being able to convene faith actors, inform them on those urgent issues that will be introduced and deliberated in these fora, hear from them what are their priorities, and then provide the sort of guidelines or almost on-ramps for them to be able to substantively engage with negotiators, with global leaders, with other civil society groups, forming coalitions across different civil society sectors in order to carry an even stronger voice to action on fossil fuels, on food, on resilience, etc. And then I think the final way that they can show up, or the third maybe that I just thought of now, being around this uplifting of good practices and sort of leading by example, right? Where there are so many ways in which faith actors are doing the work already. They're planting trees, they're providing critical services to slums or informal settlements. They're taking climate action through solar or water or other means. And both sharing that work and, even more importantly, perhaps, recognizing that they're taking an approach based in values and culture, at times faith or spirituality, that is transcendent of some of the discussions that exist at these fora, but is actually universal to the way that all of us understand the world. There's some worldview that we have that informs how we think about these issues, how we relate to each other in our environments, and the ability of faith actors to interact and engage at that deeper level of worldview, of cosmovision, I think is one of the most profoundly important and highest potential ways that they can show up in these spaces.
Gopal, I wonder if you have anything to add. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, I am back. This is live, and that's what happens. Everything broke, my microphone, my camera, everything. But I am back, but I was able to hear what you were talking about, and I heard the questions. I think reflecting on the success of this COP pavilion that we have at in Dubai right now, looking at the work that we did with the Face of Biodiversity Coalition a year ago in Montreal, where we also had a faith pavilion, I think it would be really incumbent upon us now as the faith community, quote unquote, to think through how do we build out a strategic, cohesive strategy for the next 12 months? Because I don't think what we want is a kind of like a haphazard or a siloed approach to all these moments. Like what we're advocating for at the biodiversity COP should be in alignment to what we're advocating for at the climate COP to the CCD COP, right? And that should be informed by what comes out of UNEA. And so I think I'm really keen to, and Face for Biodiversity will be keen to work with that approach, that we're aligned across the board at all these big moments. And it's not just those moments, you know, there's the G20 coming up in Brazil, which is getting a lot more kind of prominence on the global stage than it has before. And so I think that would be an approach that I think would I'd really like for us as the faith community to work on in collaboration with the WRIs and the UNEPs of the world, the development sector, but also to see how we can partner with other stakeholders, business, but also other civil society constituencies as well. I think next year is going to be a really exciting, busy moment, but also a moment where we can really shift the needle as much as possible. And the final thing I'd want us to start thinking about is, what does success look like for us as a faith community after all those moments are gone? Because I think sometimes we get caught up so much in like being in that moment and having our voice heard and getting photographs taken with the right people and being on the right panels. We don't pay enough attention to what happens the day after. And I think everything we do in these moments has to have an impact the day after. We should know what we're doing next. And so I think that would be the approach I would really love us to see going forward into 2024.
No, I think that's great. That's really important, and I hope you can still hear me. You know, we've been fortunate enough to have this vantage point of being able to kind of assess or identify, you know, what's been the impact of the network at COP26. Sorry, can you still hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Move the microphone a bit closer and we should be, there we go.
At COP26, 27, and now 28. What we saw at 26 was a very clear call for commitments. And from the highest level leadership, or at least the ones that were present, commitment shown, and ambition, the need to call for more action, call for more commitment. 27, we find that there was a little bit of a dip in the curve in terms of the progress that was made. But again, how crucial it is for us to start the planning process in planning for our presence there in advance. So taking both Lauren and Carrick's point and yours as well. What has COP28 showed us? Exactly what Carrick said, is that there's a need for us to show good practice, to talk about what that looks like. And what we're hearing, because we are only as strong as the network is, that the next part of the conversation then is really, what does partnership look like in terms of fundraising, in terms of, you know, at the national level, what do governments look at when they do want to partner and work with faith organizations, and what are the learnings there? So at every juncture, it's an exciting learning point for the work that's been done, where we've reached, and what we can do to move forward. And I'll leave you with this in true fashion. And if you know me, solutions oriented, or at least willing to present one and see where it takes us. The Faith for Earth Steering Committee has been constituted that deals specifically with how we work at UNES. At UNES 6, we recognize that there's already 85 accredited organizations, to your point exactly, but what is the impact that they have because of this accreditation? And I think that this mechanism, you know, leveraging on what's existing and what we have going already, is a good way to identify what these different points of connections are. Because as you know, UNEA isn't only a climate it isn't only a body to speak about climate related issues or only pollution related issues, but rather brings in the totality of the environmental issues. So can the steering committee perhaps be this link in the new year and years to come, to promote the coordination, to support the facilitation, and not to replicate? That's the question that I leave with you, and I believe the 10 minutes for this part of the conversation that we've been allocated by our trustee co-facilitators.
Well, we can keep going because I have some further thoughts on it, so we can just keep going with the conversation.
Of course.
We're not hard taskmasters. Yeah.
I think what you're both saying is so spot on, and I'm curious. So this year at this year's COP in Dubai, there was something like 200 mayors, governors, subnational leaders who gathered for this local climate action summit, right? The first ever. It was co-hosted, I think, by Bloomberg Philanthropies and the COP28 presidency, and countries there committed to working with cities on climate planning and action. And I'm curious, is that the kind of model that we're looking for, where we're bringing in some of these other actors? We're looking for commitments to partnership with faith actors. We're building this kind of collective strategy, because that to me sounds so compelling. And you all are some of these experts that would do that kind of convening. And so being able to hear from you about what that might look like in 2024 and even a bit beyond, I'm just fascinated.
Yeah, if I can jump in, which I always do, I think it comes to, again, for me, it comes again down to the question of strategy and what do we want to achieve, right? I'll be honest, I have trouble with the framing that we're very used to in the faith space, which is that faiths are 85% of the world's population, and by activating faith, people of faith, you're going to solve all the problems. Like, I just don't believe that. Because it implies that all the problems are caused by the 15%, which is not true. We're part of the problem as we are part of the solution. And so we're just like everyone else. And we have, although we think we have a God-given right to talk and preach, I don't really believe we do. So we're just as culpable and responsible as everyone else. So how do we work with everybody else? And I think this modality that people have to come to us for wisdom is so outdated in the world today, and definitely in these multilateral spaces. So how do we go, to use religious language, how do we go forth and share our good news or share our good work with other people, like you're saying, Bloomberg Philanthropies and, and others? And I think one way we do it is by showing the value add and the good work already happening. Like, Carrick, I'm reminded of how you and I got connected and some of the work we're now looking to do around faith and ecosystem restoration with the World Resources Institute, right? It's that the way that kind of conversation has been going was because I was doing work on that with the Center for Earth Ethics in New York City with Andrew Schwartz and Krenna Gore. And then I met the director of restoration at COP27 last year in Sharm el-Sheikh, told him about the work we're doing. He's like, this is a great idea. Let's see how we can collaborate. And it wasn't him coming to us saying, oh, I really want to work with the faiths. It was us going to him and saying, we're doing something already. We would love to partner. And I think that's part of what it is. It's like faiths kind of getting out of their own their own self-imposed silos and corners, and recognizing there are a range of actors that want to partner with us. And we just have to go out there and have a conversation with them. But it requires, going back to your earlier point, Carrick, the ability to have that conversation. It requires the ability to speak in their language and their vocabulary rather than what may come natural to us, which is the language of faith. We have to speak in technical terms. We have to speak in the policy language in order to be seen as relevant to the other stakeholders. So I think it's happening, but I think it definitely is about strategy and where we think our value add is as a faith community.
Oh my goodness, I have many thoughts running through my head. I will speak as someone who's living very much in the United States. And so we have heard from some guests during COP Drop about the frustration, of course, of what happens when a pledge is made, but then we come back to our home soil and a pledge is not what is being discussed in our Congress, right? And so then where might faith groups start to, hydrate, offer something fertile into this conversation that might just be a little stuck? And I'm thinking of a few different things. One is that as in the spaces where faith leaders, clergy, mentors, teachers, divinity school professors, in the ways that they are able to provide education, talking points, invitations to action that are around these issues. That is so important because, you know, in the United States right now, there's a lot of Christian nationalism conversation that is not talking about biodiversity, that is not talking about reducing carbon. So I think, you know, there's a real invitation here for us to be thinking a little theologically about all of this and education. And then also in a conversation with the mayor, for example, making sure that faith groups are not only perceived as charitable contributors, that yes, we will be there. I'm in California. Faith groups will be there if there's an earthquake. To the best of our ability, we will provide blankets. We will provide, you know, those sorts of resources. But how are we also actually agents of change? How are we also voters? So again, I'm kind of saying this through the lens of the United States, and I think each country, each region, each bioregion has its own version of something like this. But this is I think really important in kind of figuring out in what ways do we tend and fertilize the soil, as it were.
And I'm wondering, sorry, I want to throw it back to Azmaira, you and Carrick, but please, Azmaira, say what you want to as well. It's like, how have you two been able to navigate a faith conversation in your respective organizations? You know, United Nations, not a small organization. The World Resources Institute, also not a small organization. You know, faith, I would assume, doesn't come naturally, at least institutionally, to your respective organizations. How have you been able to navigate that? And what advice do you have for other faith actors and faith coalitions that want to be in partnership with organizations like yours?
I'd say listening is so important, because when you listen, you realize where the walls have been built up, or where kind of understanding hits a barrier of the work that we're trying to do with our partners. So it's important to listen and not to defend, but to try and offer, again, as been said, in the multiplicity of ways and with the good practices, exactly how faith organizations have been able to overcome those barriers. And so, you know, when you're speaking with someone and then an idea goes off, and we've seen that several times with Lauren, in this chat, with all of us, in fact, it's really something special to know that you've been able to speak to someone and they've listened, and it gives them something to think about a little bit more. And how faith actors can continue to work with us specifically at the Faith Forward Coalition. These interfaith thematic working groups are such an important mechanism to bring in these numerous voices. You know, whether you're experienced in policymaking, whether you just want to observe and try and understand what the space looks like, I think there's an understanding within the group that not one or 5 or 10 organizations can do it by themselves. You need the leaders, you need the academics, you need the youth, the women. And when all of these voices work in consort towards 1 or 2 common goals, but then also have their respective work going on in the background, I think that makes for a powerful way in engaging, not just at the policy level, but at the different national ones, interfaith, intrafaith. And so I leave you with, and I put this in the chat. I'm not sure how any of you online will receive this, but it is on the Faith for Earth Coalition website. The link to our most recent newsletter that has a call to action, the COP28 call to action. It's fantastic that so many of you have been following us on X, on social media, watching the live stream. And then your next question is, okay, well, how do we engage with you going forward? This is exactly it. Add your voice to this call to action, but also keep an eye on the work that we share with you through the Faith for Earth newsletters.
I think for WRI, and I'd venture to say perhaps some other actors like us, there's a recognition that we need to turn from commitment to action, and that much of our strategy in the next 5 years as an institute is about operationalizing these pledges and really making progress toward these goals. And doing so requires diversifying partnerships far beyond who have been the traditional folks in the room over the past 40 years of WRI's history, and even more for the environmental movement. And faith actors have such an important role to play in that for so many reasons, whether that's the influence they have in local communities around shaping behavior, the land or buildings or other assets that they own and manage, their influence in education and healthcare, their financial assets and holdings, so many ways in which these actors can make such a huge impact, and indeed already are. And I think, Azmaira, to your point of kind of the how, this is something that our team at WRI Faith and Sustainability is so committed to uplifting, is that there are so many good examples, good practices that are being led right now by faith actors worldwide committed to environment, development, sustainability. But there's still a dearth of research on what those practices are, how they're unique, how we can be best partnering with these groups. And our team is really committed to trying to conduct research in partnership with faith actors and other stakeholders in order to build a larger evidence base of the good work that's already going on, of the potential work that can be done, and of the gaps that need to be filled in order to catalyze those actions. And so that so far has been on food loss and waste in Rwanda. It's on environmental defenders in Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico. It's on greenhouse gas mitigation and emission reductions in parts of Europe, the United States, the Philippines, and even beyond. And I think what we found really effective within WRI and other actors in this field has been bringing the research and the evidence that's peer-reviewed, that's well-vetted, and saying, look at the huge impact that these groups are already making. Look at the potential of partnering with them to advance our common goals. It's really necessary that we do so. And there's even things that we'll learn in that process about how we can better build trust with local communities, create long-term partnerships and commitments, as faith actors often do, in order to improve our work and our efficacy as an organization.
Thank you both, all, so much. And I'm wondering, Paul, we have 20 minutes. Should we try to cover two more or one more, or where should we go?
Yeah, sure. Well, I have a question that builds on that. If I can ask mine, bring it to the table, and then maybe we close out with your question towards the end, Lauren. But well, first of all, just thanks, Carrick and Azmaira. It's good to know, let's say, how the big boys think or the big players think, and how we can get things moving. It's always insightful. And then I think for me, another question, which we at the Face of Biodiversity Coalition are very aware of, and we've had some success, but we do need to double down on a bit more, is how do we model good behavior and partnerships with other civil society sectors? So, we were just talking about the development sector, but, I'm thinking of youth, gender, indigenous communities, and then the private sector as well. Like we know, for example, in the biodiversity space, Business for Nature is a real powerhouse, and, we're good friends with them, but we haven't found a way to formally work with each other yet. But hopefully we'll find, some kind of alignment leading up to the CBD COP16 next year. So I'd just love to know, what have you seen that's worked, or has anyone seen any good examples of faiths coming into partnership with these other civil? Because there is a risk element, there's some fear from some of the other groups sometimes, and from faith side about working with, let's put it on the table, like working with gender. We know that some faith groups will not want to work with women-led organizations. We just know that's a reality. We know with indigenous groups, there's histories there which are very difficult to overcome, right? Youth are increasingly non-religious, but spiritual, and see anyone in religious garb as outdated or not irrelevant. So how do we bridge those gaps? I'm just wondering if anyone's got any good examples or ideas for how we can do that.
love to share, within UNEP's content.
Well, can you move your microphone closer to you? Because
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I'm just gonna move locations. Sorry, Carrick, if you want to go.
That was strategic, Azmaira. I think Lauren looked as if you had a thought, so please, I'll let you go.
I'll offer a few thoughts while Azmaira gets situated. I'm thinking about some of the things that we do that happen outside of the actual conversation. So to build relationship, it has been very important for me to attend ceremonies and rituals with those who practice in ways that are different from the way I do. And especially with Indigenous groups, it has been really, really expanding and deepening for me to participate when invited and certainly to attend. And so I encourage all of us to befriend those who practice in ways different from the way we do. And then in the intergenerational space, how are we being really attentive to listening and honoring those who have been in this rodeo for a while? They've learned things, they've blazed trails for us, and then younger voices come in and are so understandably impatient and concerned about what's happening, and they're bringing innovation. And so how do we have this conversation that is really sort of building upon and being really respectful, while also welcoming in all of that new energy that is bringing really good ideas. So I think there's something in the intergenerational space that's really important. Carrick, you want to add some thoughts, or Gopal?
And I was actually going to shout out URI and the cooperation circles, because I think if you all haven't had the opportunity to go on their website and check out this work that these grassroots groups are doing, involving at least 3 different belief systems, ideologies, perspectives, they are really good examples of cross-sector, diverse groups working on issues of common concern around the world. I think another critical piece for facilitating these kind of collaborations is money. And the faith and sustainability, faith and development sector is one that is not as well resourced as it needs to be in order to achieve the potential that it has. And so, much to your point, Gopal, about having the strategy and then being able to bring in the sort of financing that can carry out such a strategy, baked into that strategy need to be these kind of collaborations where gender is a component, youth and intergenerational partnerships are a component, the participation of Indigenous peoples and local communities and other civil society groups are a component, and then resourcing those folks to actually do the work, because a pitiful amount of climate finance makes it to the ground, and we need to do better. I believe that faith actors actually have the potential to be better stewards of bringing some of that finance to local communities. And that is something we need to prove and really follow through on the good work that we say we'll do.
I'm sorry for that interruption, but building on my previous point on not replicating anything, and of course coming to UNEP's own mechanisms of the 9 major group structure, this an assumption that we made, and we've been thinking about this quite a bit, on how do we engage with other civil society actors within a mechanism, right? So it's not just one-off where there's an opportunity for us to keep going back and to keep developing the narrative, the conversations. And a shout out to all the people that I'm going to be mentioning, because as you said, we approached them and they came back to us and said, finally, thanks for showing up. But David Munene, co-facilitator of the NGO major group, Dalia Fernandez, co-facilitator of the Women major group, Zuhair Kaushik, co-facilitator of the Children and Youth major group, all of them said there is a huge potential to have women faith organizations, or at least organizations that have a program specifically for women faith decision makers and leaders, youth of faith, and NGOs that or faith-based organizations, we are happy for you to come into this space, and this is how we can guide you. We can share with you these critical junctures for you to engage. And David's been crucial for the UNEP 6 preparation that has been going on. Zuhair Kaushik, on the other hand, has been thinking with us on this question of mainstreaming youth engagement, where we don't have a separate kind of faith or youth group, but we do have one that's part of the or an advisor of sorts to the faith working group of the official youth representative to UNEP. So thinking of how we engage in a deliberate way in terms of leveraging what mechanisms are already there, the friends that we have that are waiting for us to approach them and say, look, we're ready to get going. This is what we think could be the next couple of steps. I think this has been such an important learning journey for us, and is really encouraging as we go into the new year and years to come on how we engage in a more cohesive way with other civil society major groups.
Yeah, that point about finding the allies is, I think, is so important, because there are people that want faiths at the table. And if we show up and say the right things and, behave ourselves, then people will want to work with us. Yeah. I'm looking at you, Azmaira, and I'm saying behave ourselves,
Yeah, I smile there because look, who are we to say exactly how you engage in these spaces? But there, when you come into it, there's a set of rules that you ascribe to as part of civil society, and when you're accredited, you already agree, for instance, respect for the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. There's a rules of procedure that you have to abide by, but also from a basic point, respect for the other person, and humility when you're coming into these spaces to really listen and not talk at the different voices at the table, because how else do you build partnerships if you're not listening, if you're not willing to build a relationship?
Yeah. Well, on the point of relationship, I think, Lauren, that's what you wanted to bring in, right? Do you want to share a bit more about that?
Sure. I was really interested in talking with you all a little bit around this awareness that it seems to be growing, that when people are feeling good, they are more capable in helping Earth feel good. Essentially, restored people restore Earth, and restored Earth restores people. We know that's true. People spend time in nature and they feel much better. So in what ways do we think this kind of awareness could be useful, especially in spaces where conflict is thriving? I've silenced everyone. Go, Paul.
You've silenced us all. Do you want to offer us an initial answer to your question to prompt us all?
Well, this is a very important question for us at the United Religions Initiative right now, where we're looking at certainly conflict resolution and trying to interrupt violence when we see it. But I'm thinking very much about in the space where we know climate chaos and biodiversity loss is going to create scarcity with natural resources, that it will be, for many people, human nature, instinctive to become withdrawn and to retract, or to create divisiveness. And so we are looking at ways that different communities have really, really taken conflict, and instead of run away from it, kind of leaned in and said, okay, we all care about this river. So what are we doing to really tend this river and protect this forest so that we're not pitted against each other if things become more dire? That's one example, but I think that there are other ways that this plays out that, maybe are even less drastic. So I'm curious what you are seeing or what other examples you might have where restored people are restoring Earth and vice versa.
I think it's an excellent question and quite a profound one. And I generally ascribe to the first noble truth of Buddha being this idea of existence is suffering, and basically that conflict is inevitable and that it is going to increase due to the impacts of climate change. And that presents an opportunity, and how we react will determine the kind of world that we live in 50 years, right? And that we actually, I think, lack the vision of the kind of spectacular world that we could create, and we're flooded with images of apocalypse. And I really believe that there is a need for stories and artifacts, recipes and fashions, architectural designs, poems that talk about the world that we could create amidst this conflict and in reaction to this conflict, in order to make it easier for folks when they're asked, what kind of world do you want to see, to have an answer and a vision worth fighting for. Because it's really easy to ask people, what are the kind of things you want to avoid? And they have a list of the kind of things they could imagine happening in the world. But when we ask the kind of world you want to see, even when I ask myself that, it's hard to put into words. And I don't have many examples. And I've spent a lot of time now trying to read and write and watch different scenarios that could be the kind of life that we create. And so, yeah, I think it's just, for me, a sort of vote for more people who are creating those visions, who are coming together and organizing to shape climate futures that are far healthier for ourselves and for our planet.
I have no clue how I'm going to follow that up, Carrick. Thank you for going first. But jokes aside, I come back to this notion of the human connection and why we do the work that we do. And speaking from what I've been fortunate enough to see from the network, is this, as we like to call it, the values-based approach. Is that when you put respect, when you put harmony, when you put so many of these really integral values that you cannot peg to the environmental movement, but it's really how we want to overcome these trends of greed, these trends of apathy that we have, not only for one another, but for nature as well. It informs a more holistic way of thinking about how we are, how the way that we act as an individual with one another and with the things around us. So really a holistic way of thinking about the work that we're trying to do and the way that we're trying to communicate the same. Look, I think that this is critically important and it cannot be ignored. But again, look, there's a lot that needs to complement it when we show up in these spaces saying, values-based approach. These are what our sacred texts say, because as important as the inspiration is, so is what follows that. And I'm talking about the really great examples that we can leverage. For instance, a community providing electricity to those who are struggling to afford the rising cost of energy bills. And we're seeing that here in Kenya, where you have faith organizations supporting on a very small scale, other, very small communities in connecting to the grid, or even investing in alternative sources of of energy to deal with some of these issues. And we spoke about this a little bit, Lauren, before the live stream started on URI's focus. And I think this is really fascinating on ecosystems or in the environment as well as economy. So I'll leave you with that.
So much wisdom. Yeah. I just want to lift up, building on what both of you said. I think there's such a need to like envision what that future looks like, and it's so hard. And coming to your point, Carrick, because faith traditions differ on what the future looks like, right? Like your point about the first noble truth, I think what you said of the Buddha, which is like life is suffering. I remember once I was in an interfaith conversation with some Christians, and I was talking about how in Hinduism also the one of the basic understandings is that life is suffering. And this Christian woman turned to me and said, "Oh no, it's okay. You don't have to think like that." It's like, no, you're right. I don't have to, but that's what my faith teaches me. And in the Christian faith, that isn't like a fundamental basic truth of how the world operates. You know, it's a much more hope-filled, let's say, or much more like things are going to get better kind of vision of the world, right? And so we do have, I wouldn't say competing, but we do have different perspectives when it comes to the different faiths around, is the world cyclical or linear? Is it going to get better or is it going to get worse? Like these are like very fundamental questions. And they're not just theological questions, because then they inform how our institutions are built, how our economies function, how our societies also function. And so I think there's real work to be done there if we are to address the conflicts that you're talking about, Lauren, which are largely driven by like scarce resources or the perception of scarce resources. And do we all work for the common good? Do we work for our own self-interest? Now, these are some fundamental theological questions that I think we're going to need to start grappling with more and more as the climate and the biodiversity crisis gets more acute, as people start retreating into their own belief systems, which we see increasingly around the world. And so these are fascinating questions. I don't have any solutions as usual, but I just have many more interesting conversations I want to have with all three of you.
Thank you all so much. And if I were just to lift out a couple of pieces that I've heard, that despite how dystopic this can all feel, and just to kind of honor the reality of that yes, things are really bad. There's also some teachings in the season of Advent. I was raised Christian, so I'll just say, you know, this is the season when things happen that are beyond our imagination. An angel shows up and says, "Do not be afraid." What do we all have to gain from that? And then plants this seed of like, imagine the unimaginable. And so that's kind of an invitation for all of us to continue to truly imagine and to work together so that we're imagining with the diversity that has certainly been voiced in today's call. This has just been a really great conversation.
Yeah, it really has. We're already at the top of the hour, so we're going to have to close for now. But Carrick, calling in from London, who's normally based in Southern California, and Azmaira, calling in from Lisbon, who's normally based in Nairobi. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for joining us. Thank you to our viewers for watching. We apologize for the technical glitches, but that's just how these things go. We have been the COP Drop, and we will be carrying on with our live streams tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern, where we'll be continuing the conversation. And hopefully the people in Dubai are getting some good rest today before they get back to work tomorrow. Lauren, any final words from you?
Gratitude to you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. See you.